Hello, I am taking on a challenge to beat every playable Nintendo published game. The next game is Super Team Games. Super Team Games was the 7th game in Bandai's Family Trainer series, a collection of games that utilized the Power Pad. Not all of these made it to the West, and Super Team Games was the 3rd and final one that Nintendo published in the US. As a quick reminder, it was Bandai that actually invented the Power Pad, and Nintendo of America got the rights to sell it as a first-party peripheral in the US. While Super Team Games was the final Bandai Power Pad game Nintendo brought over from Japan, we still have one more Power Pad title to go, as there was one more game released for the Power Pad that Nintendo fully published themselves. However, I will go over that title a bit more in the future. For this one, that's all the history I could find, so without further ado, let's jump into my time with the game. Since this is another Power Pad game, I once again brought out a second camera to show off the pad, although I did forget to set it up for the first few minutes. On the main menu, we can see 4 different modes. Basically, this game is a collection of a bunch of campground-themed mini-games, and they are split into 2 categories, 1v1 and 3v3. Both the 1-player mode and the 2-players mode focus on the 1v1 games, while the 2-team play and tournament modes focus on the 3v3 games. Yes, you heard that right, 3v3. They expected 6 people to fit on this pad, hence the team part of the name. When I look down at this pad, I'm not even sure 6 adults would fit on it. It kind of just seems like they designed this mode around the size of children, so I don't know if I could even play these modes if I wanted to. Thankfully, the game does support a single-player mode, so at least there's one mode out of the 4 that I can play. After selecting the single-player mode, I saw that there were 4 different games to choose from: Obstacle Course A, Obstacle Course B, Super Obstacle Course, and Skateboard Race. Obstacle Course A and B were both just races with various types of obstacles laid throughout, and Super Obstacle Course was a combination of the 2. While the Super Obstacle Course seemed like the main one I wanted to beat, I started with Obstacle Course A. After selecting it, I was able to choose my opponent, and each character here basically just represents the difficulty options. The manual says that Ollie is a pushover, and it's shame on you if you lose to him. However, with a game like this, I felt no remorse in picking the easiest difficulty, so I picked Ollie. I better not lose to him or that will be humiliating. Each obstacle course is split up into various sections, and this one starts with the log hop. All I had to do here was run and occasionally jump, similar to the hurdles mode in World Class Track Meet. However, I immediately noticed a problem. The CPU was beating me. What? I thought Ollie was supposed to be a pushover. What's going on? I was doing so bad that I decided to restart and see if I was missing something. My next run didn't go any better. Something just seemed really off with my speed, as it felt really inconsistent for some reason. I kept going this time, and eventually I reached the water cross. This part has you jumping into water and doing some swimming, which basically was the same thing as the running. The manual said that if you time your jump, you'll make it over the water, but I never saw that happen. Around this time, I started to sort of figure out what was going on. The game didn't seem to like the way I was mashing the buttons. I'm not sure if it was upset at how many inputs I was doing per second, or if it didn't think I was lifting my feet up enough. I know it looks like I'm hardly lifting my feet up at all, but I was doing the exact same thing I did for World Class Track Meet, and I didn't have this problem at all during that one. I recently looked up a game facts guide of Super Team Games, and the author claimed that the game had anti-cheat methods built in to combat players trying to use their hands. He said that it does this by requiring hard enough presses on the buttons. Now, that doesn't quite line up with the problems I had, but my best guess is that something about this anti-cheese was really making it difficult for me to play. As I said before, the game seemed to be designed for children, so it's possible they didn't tune the game to someone of my weight. Another possibility is that it would have worked better on a hard surface instead of a carpet. Either way, for me, it felt terrible to actually play and get right. I ended up having to find a weird sweet spot where I was lifting my feet up and slowing down just enough to still be sort of fast, but not too much to be too slow. However, it was still really hard to be consistent with this, and frankly, it just felt so much worse to play than even something as bland as World Class Track Meet. It took me a while to even remotely get a good pattern down, and it was kind of too late for me during this first race anyway. Regardless, I saw it through to the end. The 3rd section was the wall jump, and honestly, despite looking a bit different, this was basically the same thing as the log hop. It did have an elevated section near the end, but in practice, this was still just a bunch of running and jumping. The race ended with a final sprint, and I ended with a time that was over 1.5 minutes longer than the CPU. That's right, I lost to Ollie, the total pushover. Shame on me, I guess. Now, at this point, I decided to just do the super obstacle course first. It was the main mode I wanted to clear since it was basically just a combination of the other two courses. Also, since it was the hardest, I wanted to knock it out before I ran out of energy. This one started off with the log hop, but unfortunately, Ollie once again just moved faster than me. However, the next part was the new section from Obstacle Course B, Belly Bump Ball. For this section, I had to swap between running and stopping to bounce a big ball forward. To my surprise, I was actually better than the CPU at this. I even managed to get ahead. Next up was the watercross section, and I ended it still in the lead. After this was another new section, the crab walk. This one had my character putting on a crab costume and walking sideways. All I had to do was just switch which buttons I was pressing on the power pad. Again, this didn't amount to much more than basically just running in place. I was still in the lead after this section, but not by quite as much. Up next was another wall jump section, and somehow I ended up even more ahead than last time. After this was one more section from Course B, the bubble run. This one started by making me bend down and press the power pad with my hands to blow up a bubble. Unfortunately, during this part, the CPU caught up to me, and I was getting tired. Not good. The manual said something about needing to keep your balance while running in the bubble, but I'm not sure what it meant by that. Thankfully, I did well enough that I retook the lead. The race ended with one final new section, the log run. This was basically just a sprint with a few logs placed here and there. It's pretty similar to the log hop, just with a greater focus on the running. I locked in for the final stretch and I did it. I finally beat Ollie in a race and it was on the super obstacle course too. Phew. Alright, confession time. Since the super obstacle course was basically just the combination of course A and B, and I was starting to get really tired, I decided to just cheese my way through those other two obstacle courses with my hands. I've heard stories that this was how some people played these games back in the day anyway, so let's just say it was my way of sharing in the experience. I was pretty satisfied with beating the super obstacle course with my feet anyway. As I expected, Course B contained a bunch of the super course obstacles I didn't see in Course A. It had the belly ball bounce, the crab walk, and the bubble run. Using my hands made this 10 times easier, although admittedly, even this got a bit tiring too. I crushed Ollie, and the race ended before he could even finish. Course A I've already covered, but I returned to this one with my hands to beat it too, and I ended up 47 seconds ahead of Ollie. Nice. Now, that was all of the obstacle course modes, but there was still one more game mode, the skateboard race. Thankfully, there's no running in this one. Instead, you are just switching lanes on the course by swapping which buttons you are pressing. The main goal here is to avoid obstacles, but you also go faster just by swapping, so sometimes you want to go back and forth anyway, even if there are no obstacles to dodge. There's also an occasional jump, which caught me off guard at first. The timing for this mode was kind of awkward. Because of how the detection worked, you had to do everything super early or else your character wouldn't do the action in time. It was kind of like the awkward timing of the hurdles in World Class Track Meet. Also, for some reason, there's an exact order you have to swap your feet around to, which took me a second to get used to. Unfortunately, I lost my first race against Ollie, although this was due in part to me just figuring out the controls and the timing. I beat him on my next attempt with 20 seconds to spare. With that, I had beaten all of the single-player modes. Before putting the game down though, I decided to take a brief look at all of the 6-player games just to see what I was missing out on. The first game was the 6-legged race. The objective of this one was to move your feet in time with your teammates. The second game was Tug of War. According to the manual, this one is just a test to see which team could run on the power pad the fastest. The final game was the relay race, and this one was basically just the super obstacle course mode, but with each member of the team taking turns at different parts of the race. Finally, there was also a tournament mode where 6 teams of 3 would compete in the game of your choosing using a bracket. That's right, you needed 18 people to get the full experience out of this one. I'm not even sure why they chose 6 teams, since that makes the bracket uneven. Anyway, after checking these modes out, my time with Super Team Games was complete. On to the review. Well, this one was not great. Similar to World Class Track Meet, this game has the problem of just not being all that fun. By and large, you're just mashing your feet on the ground and occasionally jumping with awkward timing. There's a bit more variety here than World Class Track Meet, which is a positive, but most of the time these differences don't actually amount to much. The worst part of the game by far though was how badly it controlled. Now, I'm willing to admit that there may have just been something about the way I was playing that made it worse, but it's hard for me not to judge the game for it when World Class Track Meet didn't have this problem at all. Out of any of the games in the challenge I've played so far, this one got the closest to feeling straight up unplayable due to how frustrating the controls were. If I had to give the game some kind of praise, it'd be that I liked the overall cartoony aesthetic, and there were some fun characters in the background. Oh, and I guess the skateboard mode wasn't quite as bad as the others, even if the timing was really delayed. Overall though, I just did not enjoy this game. These exercise games have already been a bit of a low point in the challenge, and this one takes the cake as the worst one I've played due to its awful controls. If the controls worked, I'd probably put it slightly above world-class track meet, but for my playthrough, it was barely even playable. I gave the game a 2 out of 10, a new lowest score in the challenge. With Super Team Games complete, I have now finished 60 out of the 148 NES games in the challenge, meaning I am now 40.54% of the way through all of the NES games. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to see more of these in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you won't miss out on the next one. Also leave a like if you enjoyed it, since it will help the channel grow and motivate me to continue this series. I hope I will see you in the next step of my quest to beat every Nintendo game.